Good afternoon to everybody, wherever you are around the country, around the world. We hope you are well, despite the fact that there's load shedding. But what's amazing about us as South Africans is that we are so resilient to things like this. And I guess that it impacts on businesses. And I think this is such a topical discussion that we're having. And I just cannot believe that this is the last of the iStore meets together with the GIBS Business School. It's been a fantastic series of 5. And by the way, if you missed any, if you go to istore.co.za/meets, you'll be able to find links to the other sessions that we've had. But, you know, as a small business, as an entrepreneur, they've been absolutely fantastic. The insights that have been shared have been absolutely amazing. And we've got a fantastic day today and a fantastic speaker today. So I'm really super excited to welcome our next speaker. And as we said just now, please, this is a very interactive session. We want you to engage with us. We want to hear your stories. We want to hear your questions on how you are navigating your small business, the challenges that you face, maybe something about yourself or your EQ that you might want to improve going forward. Because if there's one person that understands that and how the mind works and how our approach works to shifting our mind, to opening ourselves up to different things, is John Sanei. And John Sanei doesn't need an introduction. He is a world-acclaimed author. He's an incredible human being, and you can certainly learn a lot about being a better human being by reading some of his books. As I said, he's written 5 books already, and his latest book is Who Do We Become? And I absolutely love the title of that book because it really talks to the global trends that are happening and how everything around us is changing. And there's so much change that's happening around us where it kind of does make us feel a little bit anxious at times. It brings its own challenges to us. But I guess what I've learned from reading John's books and listening to John is how you change your mind to accept what's coming and how do you adapt yourself to really improve yourself and your attitude towards all of this change that's happening. So, John, it's so good to see you, virtually, albeit. How are you doing, firstly, mate?
I'm wonderful, Aki. Always great to see you. I don't know if the audience knows, but we know each other for 20, 30 years. So wonderful to be here with you in this platform.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome, John. I hope I introduced you correctly in terms of how this new book has taken this journey with your other 4 books. I think Who Do We Become is such a critical part because, you know, the last 2 years has been so interesting. I mean, even in my personal development, but when you see just businesses, how businesses have transformed digitally and how they're trying to get everybody to think along the same lines and evolve in the same way, it's often a big challenge for many people.
Well, it's an exceptionally large challenge because of the chasm that technology and artificial intelligence are bringing to the forefront. And in today's talk, what I want to do is explain how do we deal with this chasm while keeping the lights on, no pun intended for Eskom, but keeping the lights on, keeping the businesses going while planting seeds for what's coming ahead of us and actually crossing this bridge while actually surviving. And that's really the whole point of today's talk. I'm looking forward to sharing it.
Well, super excited, John. On that note, I'm going to hand over to you. We're doing things, and I think that this virtual world that we're living in is quite extraordinary, and it's actually working quite well. But I want to ask you a few questions on it at the end of your presentation. So I'm going to hand over to you, and I want to encourage everybody that we'll have a chance that you can ask your questions to John right at the end. So without any further ado, John Sanei, it's over to you. Let's give him a virtual welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Right, let's go and welcome everybody. Wonderful to be with you. Today's talk is all about transformation. And I've obviously played on the word transformation and created a word called transformotion. And this idea is really about us moving at an incredible pace, at hyper pace, towards maybe the most unknown future any of us have ever experienced. There seems to be so many domino effects from everything from the patriarchy to the economy to politics to power structures, to energy structures that are up for question. And I know that in South Africa, we're having load shedding, but Europe is also about to start a process of hiking their prices for energy up to 7 times, as well as warning some of their citizens about load shedding coming their way as well. So it seems to be a global problem trying to keep up with the incredible levels of growth that we're having all around the world. Before I start my keynote, I always like to just share who I am specifically, where I get my information from, so that you know that it's not coming out of a thumbsuck. But first of all, I'm a faculty member at Singularity University in San Francisco. This is all about technology. We sit on the same campus as NASA, and I'll be sharing some of the latest artificial intelligence details that I get from some of my colleagues at Singularity University. I'm also an associate partner of Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies in Denmark. And here we study human change, societal shifts, and I'll be sharing some of that with us today. And really what most important for GIBS and everybody on the call is about business strategy. And I'll be sharing some of the latest research that I get from my colleagues around Duke around business strategy. I'm also a huge fan of Dr. Joe Dispenza. I've attended 6 of his meditation retreats around the world. I've studied corporate training with him. So really about the neuroscience of what's going on inside our brains and how we go about affecting the neuroscience to deal with this much change. I've also written 5 books and co-authored another 5 books. It's really an incredible feat when I think about it, because I failed English at school. So it really shows us that it wasn't English that I was bad at. It was just what they wanted me to learn, which I hated. And also I have a podcast called The Expansive. So please join me on there. And lastly, and I think most importantly, is I call myself a futures strategist, and there's a plural on futures. And the reason for that is because I think there's multiple futures for us to move towards. CNN wants us to think that there's one apocalyptic future that we're moving towards, but that really isn't the case. I think there's incredible opportunities out there. It really just depends on how we perceive this world ahead of us, how we engage with change. And this is what the talk is going to be about today. A lot of neuroscience, a lot of psychology, a lot of perspective management, as I call it, plus the trends, the cycles, and the business strategies. Plus, and especially for this talk today, I've shown about how to build teams for today and for tomorrow, how to go about building these teams. And I'm here for Q&A afterwards if we want to get a bit more granular, and I can give you some of the examples of some of the clients I've worked with to build these tomorrow teams for them. So let's get stuck in, and let's understand that all transformations, no matter how small or how large, whether you're trying to lose weight or you are going for an education, or this massive transformation that we're going through today as humanity as a whole, always has 3 stages. And what I'm going to show you today as well is that humanity is actually going through 2 massive cycles at the same time. We're ending 2 massive cycles at the same time. And this is why there's so much extraordinary change ahead of us and so much extraordinary uncertainty ahead of us because of these 2 massive cycles. And that's what I'm going to be sharing just after this slide. But let's start off with understanding the first stage of all transformations, no matter how small or how big, is sadness. And it's important for us to become aware of the sadness and become okay with the sadness, because it really asks us to leave the shore of familiarity. It leaves the comfort zones that we once had, and sometimes even asks us to change the identity we have spent years and years developing, studying for, and growing. And what COVID-19 did is really pushed us out of the familiarity, of the comfort zones, to begin this journey towards a new world. And once we leave the shore of familiarity, we then get to the strange, the wilderness, the unfamiliar. And this is the world that we're moving into over the next 10 years. I'm going to take a real strong guess and tell you that it's going to become incredibly strange moving forward. And this strangeness is not what our brains like. Our brains love predictability. And this is the real problem that we need to deal with, is that our brains love predictability, and we have to rewire our brains to enjoy the unknown. And so the world right now is squarely between sad and strange. And in fact, if you think about it, if you don't process sadness as an emotion, it becomes anger. I think it was Caroline Leaf who said, I sat with my anger long enough until she told me her name was grief. And it's unprocessed grief that becomes anger. And the world around us is incredibly angry at what's going on around the world and the implosion of so many different structures that we implicitly trusted. But this anger can really be alchemized into optimism. And really the way we do this is by processing sadness. And as human beings, we do everything we can to not feel sad. We take drugs, we drink alcohol, we go for exercise to avoid feeling sad. But really, it's an important part of us evolving and actually becoming optimistic about the future ahead. And eventually, all transformations lead to an adventure. But I'm going to show you that we're about 5 to 10 years away from a real adventure and the real momentum that the new world will pick up. And I'll show you through the research why I say this. But I want us to also realize that the world we come from, the world that we live in, and for the last few hundreds of years, is incredibly addicted to certainty. We are all addicted to certainty. It's called economies of scale, efficiency, and quarterly profits. We are driven by the certainty, and this addiction to certainty is making many of us uncomfortable. And the reason is that there is no certainty anymore. There is only uncertainty. And I'm going to again show you how and why through the talk. And so the first thing we have to do is unhinge ourselves from this addiction to certainty. And I'm going to show you the neuroscience that's being sort of researched by Stanford University to help us with this process of unhinging us from certainty. But let's also think about the type of optimism that many of us have. And it's an optimism I call fragile optimism. And it's based on the fact that if I get what I want and exactly what I want, I'll be happy. And if I don't get what I want, I'm going to be unhappy. This is the addiction to certainty, or called fragile optimism. And by the end of this talk, I hope that you will become more agile in your optimism. And by this, I mean you become optimistic about the behavior that's required for change, not the end result of change, but the actual behavior for the change. And ultimately, nobody can tell us what the future looks like. There are just far too many domino effects that are happening, from societal to economic to politics to humankind changing in such massive ways. And so what we have to do, if we can't predict the future, is manage our behavior. And this is really the crux of the talk, is to develop agile optimism for all of us, so we can all build a more agile, optimistic world ahead of us. Now, because of this addiction to certainty, UNESCO's Future Literacy Program calls this mega trend that humanity is going through a poverty in reimagination. And the truth is that many of us are using imagination in the worst possible way. You know, Einstein says that imagination is everything, even more important than knowledge, because it gives us the forthcoming attractions for what the world looks like ahead of us. And the best way to describe it is imagination sometimes works amazingly when you want to buy a new car and then you see that car everywhere. Or if you don't like somebody and you think about that person often, you keep bumping them at the petrol station, at the grocery store, at the gym. This is all our imagination creating this reality ahead of us. But today, as a human population, most of us are anxious. And this anxiousness is actually catastrophizing the future, using our imagination in the worst way possible, and then preparing for war, for survival into this future that is unknown. And this is really a broken process inside our heads. And so in order for us to actually evolve into a more optimistic population, we need to use our imagination in a very, very different way. And again, by the end of the talk, I hope I would have given you the tools to develop better imagination and agile optimism as we go into the most unknown future that any of us have experienced. So let's get stuck into the talk, because what I want to start with is 2 cycles. The first cycle is called the fourth turning. And the fourth turning is really about the next 5 to 10 years. And the second cycle will be a much broader cycle, really setting us up for the next 50 to 100 years as humanity and showing us where we've been for the last sort of 500 years. But let's start off with the fourth turning. And the fourth turning, if you don't know, is a book that came out in 1996 by 2 guys called William Strauss and Neil Howe. This book, when it was launched, really nobody paid it any attention, and then became a bestseller in 2008. That's a long time after it was written. And then it kind of faded away, and then again became a bestseller in 2020. Now, we know in 2008 we had a financial crisis. In 2020 we had COVID happening. So really this book has become quite the gospel when it comes to thinking about strategy, about human change. And so this book is really something that is just extraordinary in the way it shows us the research that it's done. Now, William Strauss and Neil Howe, you most probably won't know who they are, but you've actually used their language hundreds of times in your life. They, in 1986, brought out a book called Generations. And in that book, they taught us about baby boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, and Gen Z. And they are the ones who actually introduced generational archetypes to us. And today, consumer behavior is based on this. We all understand that our grandfathers and our kids all have different motivating factors to what makes them successful. And this is really brought about by William Strauss and Neil Howe. So they have a lot of gravitas in this space. And so when they brought out this book in 1996, what they showed us is that humanity is actually going through these very broad cycles that they called cyclums. And these cyclums are 80-year cycles that we've been going through, and they've tracked them back down to the 1600s, 1500s. So these 80-year cycles have been going on without us even realizing. Now, what they said in the book in 1996 is that the last time an 80-year cycle ended was 1946 with World War II. And the 20 years leading up to that World War II crescendo, we had fascism and political divide with Hitler and Mussolini. We had job losses by the millions. We had a financial crisis back then, and we had war. And sound familiar? Because we're kind of exactly in the same place, because at the end of every 80-year cycle, we seem to have the same characters rising to the forefront to try and keep the old world alive. Exactly what Hitler and Mussolini did, exactly what Putin and Trump are doing today is keeping America great again, keeping Russia like it used to be. These are old adages of old worlds. But let me take you through these 80-year cycles, because I think it's a fascinating understanding and broad macro acceptance of where we are in these cycles. Now, what they say is that these 80-year cycles are broken up into 4 seasons, very similar to spring that we have, which they call the high, summer, which they call the awakening, unraveling, which is the autumn, and finally you have crisis, the winter that we are in presently. And this is really gave me so much solace, because it made me realize why there's so many implosions happening around us and why so much is up for question at the moment. So let's go back down to 1946 and to realize that that 20 years after World War II was an incredible time for humankind. There was this renaissance of sorts, and really what we started off with was the space program that was introduced into the world over this period of time. We had the United Nations being introduced to the world. The dollar became the global exchange. We had Bretton Woods happen. We had jets being introduced to the world. We had TVs being introduced to the world. This was a real incredible time of peaceful living, innovation, and growth in many, many sectors, and really was an amazing time for us. But all springs are followed by summer. And the summer, as they call it, is an awakening. And 1964 to 1984 was this awakening of humankind in many different ways. Now, I use Woodstock as an example because there were many Woodstocks over that time, but the use of psychedelics gave us a new understanding of who we were as human beings. And if you really think about psychedelics today, and so many universities around the world that are starting to understand that the study of psychedelics are actually helping mental health, PTSD, depression in the most unbelievable ways without using any of the current medication. And really this began and sparked at this era of awakening of humankind. Also, over this period of time, we had the introduction of computers, a brand new way for us to communicate and awaken us to a new way to run our businesses and our personal lives. And my favorite one over this period of time was the introduction of Star Wars, awakening to who we were as humankind in the possible and probable universe around there. It really blew my mind open and really has set the tone for us into this deep space exploration in many ways, awakening us to our place in the universe. But all summers are followed by autumn, and the unraveling, where the leaves fall off the trees, begins with the Berlin Wall falling. And the Berlin Wall was really the Cold War coming to a crescendo, and also starting to see that communism as a system was starting to crumble, and Berlin Wall was the unraveling of this old world. And we also have Tiananmen Square happen over this period of time, the unraveling of that very stronghold of China and the communist way that it had, and now it's evolved into this capitalist nationalist type of system. We also had Exxon Valdez happen over this period of time, which was a massive disaster, but actually catalyzed the green movement, stopping business at all costs. And now today we have all these environmental situations and inclusion and diversity. And really, Exxon Valdez was a huge catalyst and unraveling of business at all costs. And for the ladies on the call, you'll be happy to know that the patriarchy started to unravel over this period of time, and the feminist movement really started to pick up momentum over this period of time. And today we know the equality of female and male is an absolute necessity, and we are building towards that slowly as we start to evolve. But really, the unraveling of this began over this period of time. But all autumns are followed by winter. And remember, this book came out in 1996, and they said in it, we're not going to make any predictions. We're just going to tell you what happened in the last 80-year cycle. The last 20 years of every 80-year cycle, there's chaos. Why? Because we are starting to come to an end of a season, of a whole process of 80 years. And in 2008, we began with a financial crisis. This is when the book became a bestseller. We have Le Pen, we have Trump, we have all these Putin's, we have Brexit, all of this around nationalism and political divide, just like Mussolini and Hitler did. We have massive levels of job losses around the world, not only because of the financial situations, but also because of technology at the moment. And then up until about 6 months ago, I thought COVID-19 was the war that we were all expecting, because we lost 6 million people. There was an invisible enemy that we were all fighting. But then this Muppet woke up and started his shit up there in Russia. And sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but this guy started his crap up there. I suppose that's also a swear word, but anyway, started trouble up there in Russia. And really now what we have is we have a real crisis of meaning on our hands. And the truth is that we still have 6 more years of this winter and crisis to go. And remember that the future is here, just unevenly distributed. So there's obviously pockets of the world that are differently experiencing this, but a global, grand, mega scale trend process, most of us are in a crisis of meaning. And by this, I mean, education used to guarantee us a job. It doesn't anymore. The fastest growing religion in the world is no religion. The patriarchy was something we looked up to. We can't do that anymore. The idea of financial stability using the dollar was something that we relied on. It's really a house of cards in many ways. The political system was something that we looked up to back in the 80s and 90s. When I was a kid, I remember my parents watching the news and absolutely believing everything the prime minister and president said, because that was kind of the thing we did, right? Today, we don't believe any of it. We think all of it is propaganda, as we rightly should. And so here we are in a crisis of meaning. And the reason I start off the keynote with the cycle is because you're not alone. You know, every time you turn on social media, you turn on TV, you read the paper, you see things are imploding. Things that we once implicitly trusted, we can't trust anymore. And I'm just here to tell us that we still have 6 more years of this left, according to their research. And also we have to be okay with the fact that many of the amazing things that we are experiencing today is because of the demise of the old world in 1946. And so we are in this process of an implosion of the existing structures of the world around us. But this is just for the next 6 years to 10 years. But let's look at a bigger cycle. And if we think about a bigger cycle that's out there, is this concept of human beings and what parts of our bodies are we using to actually make decisions with and make an impact into the world with. And so if we think about agricultural times, for hundreds of years, the agricultural era lasted and made civilization as we understand it today. And there were certain rules in agricultural times that we had to follow. The first rule was follow your forefathers, because your forefathers understood the seasons. They taught you about the soil. They taught you about the plants. And because of this, we were able to now build civilizations, villages, towns, cities. And in this process, the most important thing we needed to do as human beings was work in the field 16 hours a day to be able to feed our family, create some products to take to the market to trade with. And we realized that for hundreds of years, if you followed your forefathers, worked in the fields for 16 hours a day, and were physically strong, you would be successful. And for generations, this was the case. But then about 200 years ago, when the Industrial Revolution starts to arrive, we start to develop new power sources. The steam engine arrives, the combustion engine arrives, and all of a sudden, the physicality of humans is irrelevant. And it doesn't matter how strong you are not as strong as a factory, you're not as strong as a steam engine. So the rules start to change, and we go from follow your forefathers to follow the system. And the system is the subjects you learn at school, the degrees you get at university, the jobs that are out there in the corporation. So the more you follow the system, the more successful you become. And in this process, the most important thing over the last 200 years is, in order for us to develop logical thinking, IQ, analytical thinking, and we go to schools to develop this process of analytical thinking and logical thinking. And for 200 years, this has seen us to become incredibly successful. And so we realized that over the last 200 years, we went from being physically prioritized to now mentally prioritized, because nobody on this call is working 16 hours a day in a field anymore, but we all here, and we've developed a brand new muscle over the last 200 years. And this now logic, IQ, is by far the most important thing that we could be having, because this is what gets us to fit into the system and become more successful. But like I said, we are moving from the fourth turning to the first turning. And now what we're doing is moving from the industrial era to the quantum era. And we can see this with the advent of quantum computers, with the advent of quantum science, and us starting to realize that reality is actually a very different thing that we once thought about before, moving away from Newtonian science to quantum science and the normal computers of ones and twos, zeros and ones, to both zeros and ones being on at the same time, which is kind of weird for us to even understand because we think in linear ways, and quantum is not linear at all. And there's new rules that we're starting to adopt have changed. And so we went from follow your forefathers, follow the system, to now follow our uniqueness. Now, the best way to describe this is, if you've got kids here on this call, your kids most probably want to be influencers and YouTubers. And many of my audiences always put their hands up because that's what their kids want to be. But actually what their kids want to do is celebrate their uniqueness, because the best influencers, the best YouTubers in the world have accessed their genius, have accessed why they're here on earth, their uniqueness, their unique signature, and they're able to make millions of dollars selling this uniqueness out into the world. And so the kids don't want to follow what our parents did because they don't find it exciting, just like we most probably didn't find what our parents found exciting. And so the rules now are follow our uniqueness through a process of fascination and curiosity. And so we realized that over agricultural times, physicality was the most important thing. Over industrial times, our mentality was the most important thing. And as we move into an uncertain future, in order for us to be really agile in our optimism, to look forward to the unknown and look for incredible amounts of opportunities, our emotional state now becomes the most important thing. Because if you think about it, we have the most clever people in the world with the most amount of degrees, with the most amount of education, with capitalism at its highest point, with the stock market booming. Obviously things are going up and down, but really there's more money in the world than ever before. The mentality and cleverness is at an all-time high. But we have the most level of unhappiness in the world. We have the most amount of pharmaceuticals being taken. We have everybody drinking and having wine o'clock and drug take. And there just seems to be an incredible amount of emotional unrest. And if we're able to deal with this incredible level of change, we actually need to become much more emotional in the way we approach the world. So the world doesn't need more clever people, it needs more wise people. And the kids of today are actually being wired for this, or born wired for this already, and moving into a space of expressing themselves on the channels like Instagram and YouTube and all of these is really about them accessing their emotions, their passion, their fascination. And this really becomes the currency of the future that we're moving into. And already we have something called the creator economy, and it's $16 billion strong and growing exponentially. And this shows us that the future is much more about a fitting out process than a fitting in process. And the reason is that education for the last 200 years has educated most of the human population in exactly the same way. So we have a surplus of clever people working for similar types of companies, creating similar types of products, creating similar types of services, and everything seems to be commoditized. Think about cell phone networks, all the same. Think about Adidas, Puma, Nike, pretty much all the same. It seems to be all along the same sort of stuff because of the same process that the sort of mental state of the Industrial Revolution required of us. So in order for us to create agile optimism, we need to actually start asking different questions and not always be addicted to certainty. And the reason agile optimism becomes such an important thing is because technology is actually replacing everything that we did in the Industrial Revolution. And this is what's creating so much panic, is because our skill sets are becoming slowly but surely irrelevant. Just like in agricultural times, when you were strong and could work the fields for 16 hours a day and the steam engine arrived, your power was irrelevant. And so now when we think about analytical thinking and logical thinking, it's becoming almost irrelevant when we move into the future with AI doing it faster, quicker, and better, just like a steam engine is so much better than a human being. So there's 3 technologies that I think are just unbelievable and how they're changing things. It's IoT, Internet of Things, and our ability to collect trillions and trillions of data points on a continuous process. The growth and exponential growth of machine learning and artificial intelligence, and I'm going to show you a couple examples of that now, and the decentralization of the world ahead of us through the process of blockchain. Now, the blockchain is a tough thing to understand, and so was the internet in 1998, but all of us are kind of understand the applications on top of the internet. Many of us don't even understand what the internet is yet. I definitely don't. Neither do I understand how electricity is created. So blockchain is not important. It's the platforms that we plugged into blockchain that gives us a decentralized world ahead of us, making lots of existing structural businesses irrelevant. But let me take you through how technology is making almost everything it touches free. And this is a weird concept because many of us feel a lot of pressure around rising costs of things. But let's not forget that technology is able to replicate anything it touches for almost free. Think about when we used to go and buy music at the stores, at a shop called Musica here in South Africa, in London, HMV. Guess what? Both those stores don't exist anymore. Why? Because we have Spotify for $5 a month. You don't even have to choose your music. You get your music suggested to you because of the combination of digitization and repetition, plus AI suggesting it to you, collecting the data points on what we like. So my relationship with music is 180 degrees different. The type of music I listen to and suggested to by Spotify has really changed my relationship to music in many ways. And it's costing me $5 a month rather than buying a CD every time I want to listen to something new. Remember when we used to have to go and print photos? Today, we have millions of photos on our phones. We can share them as million times as we want, almost for nothing. And then remember when we have to pay for education? I know here at GIBS, we still charge. GIBS is, and many educational systems are still charging, and rightfully so. There's a lot of clever people teaching people some good things, but also we have YouTube and we have many other sort of free access to education. And a big question that I always ask my audiences is, who here baked bread over COVID-19? And most people put their hands up, and then I ask, where did you learn the recipe? And they'll say YouTube. So YouTube has many, many different types of education that it can give. And a lot of my information comes from all the institutions that I'm included with, but also from YouTube because of my access to this free education that we have. And remember when we used to have to go hire DVD stores and those sort of things? Today, Netflix has so much choice that many of us jump on, click through a bunch of different things and even give it up. I myself have actually stopped my Netflix subscription because it's just too much choice. I always feel a little bit frustrated when I go on there and we can see their share price tanking at the moment. And really, they have got a major thing wrong. They should be suggesting better, not just keep creating more and more entertainment, but actually getting better at suggesting, just like Spotify has done. And so if we think about how this is going to now extend into more categories, this is the best person to think about. His name is Jeremy Rifkin. He's written a book called The Zero Marginal Cost Society. He's a global economist that advises China, EU, and Germany on the third industrial revolution. And what he says is that capitalism itself is eating itself like a snake that's eating its own tail because of capitalism's need to bring about more and more and more and more efficiencies. This efficiency has created almost free access to many things that we used to pay a lot of money to. And the 3 pillars that he talks about is communication. Right now, we're all sitting on Zoom. It's costing us a fraction of a cent to be on here, and we're connected to people all around the world. And this becomes quite an obvious one. But as he says, as we move into the future, energy will start to become free as well. And this is a difficult one to think about, but it was also difficult for us to think about free photos when we were spending so much money printing them, and free entertainment when we're hiring DVDs and paying cell phone companies so much money for per minute talks, but now it's all free. So what he says is that energy is next, and also transportation. And transportation is a bit easier to understand when you have driverless cars coming to pick you up with renewable energy, no drivers, no oil, no engine parts. That becomes quite obvious that becomes free over the next period of time. So what we have is technology making all the things that used to cost us a lot of money, and in fact, maybe took a lot of our energy to create and produce, making them almost free because of the access of technology. But let's touch on to artificial intelligence and how artificial intelligence is also changing so much around us. I don't know if you know about this, but this is called GPT-3 Original Text Platform. You can go online at the moment right now and use it for free. Just Google GPT-3 platforms and you'll have a bunch of them pop up. Hyperwrite.ai, Writer.ai. There's so many of them. Go check them out. But you can go onto these sites and you can put in there, I want a 10,000 word article, or I want an email sent, or however you want to structure the words, and say, I want let's say a 10,000 word essay written on Sudanese women that carry water for longer than 3 kilometers over summer in Sudan. And I want it written in an analytical way. And you press the button and within 4 seconds, you have an essay written that's original text. This is the key. It's original text, which means you can copy and paste it and put into Google. It's never been written before. This makes my job as an author kind of null and dull and defunct in many ways. So if you want to write a better email, you want to write a better blog, you want to write better SEO copy, you go onto GPT-3 and you have it for free. And this is all available to us already as we go through. And AI is now helping write songs. In fact, watch this video of this guy who loaded 1,000 hours of hip hop songs into AI, and look at the song, or hear the song that AI wrote.
How? Tell me how. I just played in AI 1,000 hours of hip hop music. 1,000 hours, just hip hop music. And I got it to create its own hip hop song based on what it had heard. Yo, this is crazy. This is really crazy. Here we go.
Hey, pretty girl, why ain't you mine? Deep dive, see what you find. We are gon' treat you nice. Seaside, palm trees and wine. Hey, kitty kid, get way too fine. One shot, don't feel too kind. 2 shots, make me feel wild. 3 shots, yeah. I had a mad dream just the other night. I took a look.
Keeps on going. Shows us that writing songs has also become something blasé that AI can do. I'm sure you've seen DALL-E 2 because it's all over the press. DALL-E 2 was expected to come out over the next 5 years or so. It's shocked all AI enthusiasts, as well as open AI that's behind it. And with this, what you're able to do is type anything into DALL-E 2 and it develops 20 different pictures of original art available for you to use. This is incredibly disruptive to the ad agency world, to the entertainment world, because if you just extrapolate GPT-3 into GPT-4 and GPT-5 and DALL-E 2 into DALL-E 3 and DALL-E 4, what you'll realize is that you'll be able to ask GPT-4 and GPT-5 to write you a movie script for your daughter that suffers from stuttering, and you want GPT-4 to write a movie to show your daughter a character like her with her 2 pets, Solly and Molly, to help her understand that through bravery and through focus and through whatever the case may be, courage, that she can overcome her stuttering. And you can put that movie script into DALL-E 4, DALL-E 5, and it can create a movie for you immediately. And already DALL-E 2 is making little GIFs, which means that DALL-E 3 will start to make small movies. Now, I'm not saying this to scare you. I'm trying to get you to understand that AI is here, technology is here. We have to evolve ourselves to meet this future at what it needs from us. Rather than complaining that it's changing so fast or panicking that things are happening, it's time to really take on this question of who do we become? How do we evolve? What are the tools that we need to engage with in an optimistic way so we can evolve and not stay and become irrelevant? Now, this is, again, part of DALL-E 2, but using different technologies. Watch this video quickly. Come back.
Will artificial intelligence replace the role of visual effects artists? It already has.
I'm not real. Kurt Skeleton is a fake character I made using multiple AI-powered programs, and here's how I did it. His face was created using the first release of DALL-E. I played around using different prompts until I created the perfect look. I didn't want to make him look hot because I wanted people to follow him for his jokes and visual effects, so it hurt me to do it, but I had to make him look really funny looking and ugly. I rendered out hundreds of these photos and fed them into an AI-powered program called Convert Skeleton to generate a full 3D model based off these pictures, which is where I got the idea for his name. Honestly surprised no one caught that. Now all I have to do is record my video, send that clip to deepmotion.com, which uses AI to motion capture my movements, then apply that animation to the Kurt Skeleton model. For the facial expressions, I use Deepfake Lab, again using those images from the DALL-E renders. His voice is the only part that isn't AI. Since the program that I want re-speecher costs too much, I just deepen my voice like this and put a ton of effects and modulation to make it sound like Kurt Skeleton. So be sure to follow my actual account down below and comment what you guys think. Should I keep posting this account as Kurt Skeleton, or is the experiment over now?
So Kurt Skeleton has 350,000 followers on TikTok. There are many like AI-driven influencers online. There's one on Instagram. I forgot her name now, but she has 3.5 million followers. And so this is starting to become quite a thing. And we're going to start seeing really the change in creativity for humans when it comes to making movies, making advertising, and these sort of things are starting to evolve in a massive way. Now, the last one around AI that I want to show you is this Norwegian company that created an AI, and this AI started to learn how to code, and it then coded itself onto a 3D printer and then printed itself off that 3D printer and crawled off. So what you're seeing right now on the screen is a AI that learns how to code, to 3D print itself, and to crawl off a machine. I don't need to remind you to extrapolate this into the future over the next few years, but this is what's happening around us. And so this is why Agile Optimism becomes such an important thing, because this is scary to all of us. But then just a few days ago, I saw this video.
Google just put its most powerful AI brain into a robot body. It's a technology called Palm Saycan, built into robots from Google's sister company, Everyday Robots. It uses a type of AI called natural language processing. Basically, the AI was trained to understand humans by reading millions and millions of documents, mostly off the internet. That means you don't have to tell it really robotic commands like pick up apple. You can talk to it normally and say something like, I'm hungry. It understands that language, breaks it down into a series of actions, then works out whether it can perform those actions in the real world. This is a big deal, and it has huge implications for the future of robotics and human helpers. Finally, we're starting to see a future with walking, talking robots that can think just like us.
Again, like I said, the future is not about being more clever. We can't compete there. We have to become emotional and emotionally aware. And I have a whole 3-day workshop on developing emotional fitness, because this becomes the skill and currency for the future. And it's really about understanding the neuroscience in evolving into this. But let's talk about business, because I think it's important for us to realize how AI and data is changing business right under our nose. And this is really a concept of moving from a understanding of the world from a complicated world to a complex one. The world of complications is the one that we've been trained in and understand really, really well. But the world of complexity is something that we don't quite understand and have to become ready for. And this is where the new business strategies need to start developing. And today's talk is about doing business in the future. So this is really what it's all about. And I wanted to build context of the cycles, the 80-year cycle ending, the end of the Industrial Revolution, us understanding that technology is making most things free around us. Now with AI coming on board, changing the dynamics of so many different things we didn't even expect to be changed. So we really have to start to understand how this impacts us as human beings, as well as how it impacts business. So let's understand what a complicated world is. A complicated world coming from the Industrial Revolution is a world that has patterns that repeat themselves. This is called hyper-efficiency, economies of scale, production line, corporations and organizations, quarterly profit programs. This is all about pattern repetition and pattern recognition, patterns that repeat themselves. That's why for many, many, many years, we could have 5- and 10-year business plans. Today, we can't, obviously, because we're moving into a complex world. And in this world of complications, we were able to use mathematics, Excel spreadsheets, and accounting to actually direct this future, because the future was almost similar to the past with some minor deviations. And everything inside a complicated world eventually becomes automated. Why? Because automation loves pattern repetition and pattern recognition. And so this becomes a commoditized world, just like music becoming free, all these actors becoming almost AI driven. All of this stuff becomes commoditized away from our skill set as human beings. Now, the crux of this business model is economies of scale and efficiency, something we've been taught for the last 200 years. It's part of economics, accounting, mathematics. Pretty much all business studies talk about economies of scale and efficiency. And this is how we measure success in many ways around the world. And nothing wrong with it. Love profit, just like all of us here. But we also have to realize there's new ways to make profits. And this is really the introduction of a complex world. Now, the rules of the complex world are 180 degrees different, totally different to the complicated world. So let me explain. The complex world has some patterns, but they don't repeat themselves. And because of this, we can't use accounting, Excel spreadsheets, and accountants to figure out, or mathematics to figure out the future, because the future is dynamic, not linear. It's exponential, not gradual. And so like the world we come from, this new world is just vastly different to the world we come from. And nothing in this new world has actually been automated yet away from us. In other words, DALL-E 2 is excellent at art, but can't drive a car. Tesla can drive a car, but can't make a piece of toast or write an essay. And so we really are the only beings at the moment that are able to deal with a complex world. And in order for us to become really great at a complex world, we have to be emotionally aware. And like I said, the emotional aspect of this is we can do a Q&A on it, has got a whole range of things that we need to do for it. But this is a business talk, and this is why I wanted to keep it around this. But ultimately, this is the changing factor, is that we have to move from economies of scale to economies of learning. And we have to move from efficiencies to robustness. Now, what does this mean? Because these words are kind of new. So let me explain what they mean. I'm going to give you two examples. The first one is, when we go to an airport and we put our suitcase on the conveyor belt, the conveyor belt is a complicated world. Why? It has patterns that repeat itself, is highly automated. It has hardly any people attached to it. It's incredibly commoditized, and we're able to get our suitcases onto our planes 99% of the time, which I think is a bloody miracle. If you carry on watching this video with the Dubai airport, with thousands, if not millions of people coming through that airport, and I've never, touched wood, I've never lost my suitcase, and it's always come and arrived with me at my destination. Doesn't matter how many different connecting flights I've had. And this is really a miracle of technology in a complicated world of patterns repeating themselves. Now, the minute we take off and we're in the air, now we're in a complex world. And what does this mean? Is that when you're up in the air, you have no idea what's coming. It's uncertain. So what do? You're robust in your expression of services. In other words, you have 3 pilots when 1 is enough, 4 engines when 1 is enough, 25 operating systems when 1 is enough. Why? Because you have no idea what's coming. So you over prepare. Economies of learning says, I'm continuously learning and changing what I need to do. So a plane sees a storm coming, one of the engines goes off, a pilot, God forbid, dies. We have now new programs to apply economies of learning, continuously readjusting. The conveyor belt, no economies of learning, economies of scale. Do the same thing over and over and over and over, bring about efficiencies. Economies of learning says it's never the same thing. It's always different. We always have to over prepare. Now, let me give you a real life example of this. Now, we all know Zara, the king of fast fashion. And really, when they introduced fast fashion 15 years ago, 10 years ago, it changed every single clothing brand, from the cheapest Primark to the most expensive Louis Vuitton. Everybody became a fast fashion brand. Instead of bringing clothes seasonally into their stores, they just kept bringing new things into their stores all the time, because they realized, which is kind of obvious now when you think about it, that the more options there are, the more we go in, the more we buy, it just keeps that retail therapy going much better. But over the last 2 years, we've started to have a brand new kid on the block. And this new kid on the block is worth $100 billion, where Zara is worth $13.2 billion, which shows you how quickly the new kid on the block, called faster fashion, called Shein, is now eating market share away from pretty much every clothing brand in the world. And Shein is doing some incredible things. And Shein's actually built on an economies of learning business and not an economies of scale business. So let me just remind you of economies of scale at its pinnacle, because Zara is at the king of economies of scale. They're able to deliver products twice to their 1,600 stores around the world, an incredible feat in anybody's books. They're able to add 300 new styles to all their 1,600 stores around the world. They bring 10,000 new styles to their stores a year. I want you to remember that number, 10,000 a year. And then they're able to take products from design to stores within 10 to 15 days. Again, I mean, it's an unbelievable miracle what they do. And they have these ships on the waters where they download all the material into the ships, and then they sail towards wherever they're delivering them, with people sewing on the way to the delivery. So just an incredible, incredible business. But it's a problematic thing to think that these people that were on the cutting edge of their world are starting to become kind of blasé and kind of like the old uncle in the room. So welcome to Shein, the giant killer. And Shein really became very, very popular because of TikTok and the rise of TikTok. But Shein is not even a clothing business. See, Shein is a social media and data management business using artificial intelligence to understand what the market wants. And it was started by a guy who started selling wedding dresses online and started to get into SEO. And that SEO became data analytics, became social media. And they realized that there was a huge gap in the market of clothing. And so what does Shein actually do? Shein looks at the pictures online across all social media sites that have been liked and shared the most. They scrape all these pictures off. And this is what's telling them what we like as far as clothing is concerned, right? So now the economies of learning has already begun because they're learning what we want. They don't have to guess what we want. We are liking and sharing these things. They scrape the most liked and shared pictures of clothing online. And what they do is they computer generates 10 different versions of this clothing in 20 different colors, and they're able to put them onto their website minute by minute, updating their website. And you know how many styles they add a day? 10,000 styles a day. But here's the cherry on the top. It's costing them almost nothing to get 10,000 styles onto their website a day. Whereas Zara has cost them billions and billions of dollars to get 10,000 styles into their stores on an annual basis. Now, Shein is also only manufacturing when you place your order, meaning that there's no wastage on their front. If you throw the clothes away, that's your thing. But Zara and H&M and them have come under huge scrutiny for throwing away so much clothes at the end of the season because people haven't bought them. And also Shein is able to give you some of the clothing items for up to 70% cheaper than Zara, H&M, and Mr. Price. And the reason for this is they have no retail costs, no retail rent. They have no retail staff. They have no warehousing. They have none of these design studios. They are using us as the economies of learning to actually develop what they need to be selling. Now, remember that Shein's only a few years old, already $100 billion strong, doesn't even have a manufacturing unit. It is a data management business, which is really what we think about when we think about the future. Now, the problem is the world around us is best described by Herman Kahn, one of the best futurists that ever lived. He's passed away, unfortunately. But Herman Kahn said it best. He said, the more educated, or at least the more expert, or at least the more educated a person is, the less likely that person is to see a solution when it is not within the framework in which he or she was taught to think. And this is always my question, and you'll see the next phase of the keynote is this is my question, is that if Zara was so clever, why didn't they come up with Shein? And if Mercedes-Benz is so clever, why didn't they come up with Tesla? And if Blockbuster was so clever, why didn't they come up with Netflix? And so we realize that the more expert we are, the more legacy thinking we have, the more stuck we are to doing things in the same way. And so what we have to start realizing is this is a massive difference between innovating, or what I call today work, and disrupting, what I call tomorrow work. And so what we do is, unfortunately, most organizations ask their existing staff to be both innovative and disruptive, to both keep the lights on about yesterday, plus think about the world in disruptive ways. And my worst line in the world is think out the box. Like, how do you think out the box? How do you stop being who you are? How do you stop all the education you've had, all the brain patterning you've had, all the experience you had, now become magically somebody else to think about a world in a totally different way? It is impossible, especially with such a chasm of change ahead of us. So what I think the world requires, in as far as business strategy is concerned, is to stop making our staff schizophrenic, is to actually focus our teams on doing today work and have certain teams working on tomorrow. Because Mr. Price today is building a Shein equivalent. Why? Because they've seen them arrive, but Mr. Price should have done this already if they had a tomorrow team. But let me give you some examples of today and tomorrow teams. But before I do, let's just make sure that my language, which I think what innovation is, can we share the same language? Now, obviously, these words have many different iterations, but for me, innovation, or as I call it today, is doing what you've always done, more modified and more efficiently. Or another way of saying it is doing old things better. And we need to be more modified, more efficient on a continuous basis. This is important, but let's not mix it up with disruption, because disruption, or what is required tomorrow, is vastly different. Like I've shown you with the Shein example, I'm going to show you a couple more examples now, because creating tomorrow business models is actually making your current business model obsolete to create a new business model. Now, I don't see any business doing that because it almost goes counter to your own survival. And so you need these two parallel businesses focusing on today and one focusing on tomorrow. Let me give you some examples of businesses that got this wrong. A today business that got this wrong is sorry, let me get my slides right. So is a company called Gillette. We all know Gillette, but Gillette was very focused on today business. And what did they do? They went from 1 blade to 2 blade to 3 blade to 4 blade to 5 blade. Did anybody need all these bloody blades? I definitely didn't. They did so much blading, they outpriced themselves out of the market. And you've got to feel sorry for them, because every time they added a blade, it was incredible. By the time they're adding their 5th blade, it became so expensive to buy one of the blades that not only because of a growing love of beards, but because of them pricing themselves out of the market, Procter & Gamble in 2019 shaved off, excuse the pun and the joke, shaved off $8 billion off their balance sheet. Now, this is a very well-known brand that got it wrong. Why? Because all they focused on was innovation, not disruption. At the very same time, we had the $1 Shave Club that was sold to Unilever, the competition for Procter & Gamble, for $1 billion. And what they did was disruptive. They made the current business model of supply and demand into stores. They broke that model and went on to a subscription business model. For $1 a month, you get 2 blades sent to your house every month, and you never have to leave your house. And much cheaper, much better, and you're always getting a fresh blade sent to your house. Now, remember that the light bulb wasn't, come back. Come back, sorry. Let me go back, sorry. The light bulb wasn't invented because we made the candlestick more efficient. So we must still make our businesses more efficient, but we can't ask the same people to do the both, because we need new capabilities, new brains that are not fixated with quarterly profits, but with more long-term approaches. Now, let me give you an example of a company that thought about tomorrow in a very, very different way. Japan Airlines wanted to understand what the future of travel was going to look like. And so what they did was they made sure they weren't going to ask their pilots, engineers, air hostesses, and air stewards, because what would they have said? They would be innovative in the way they thought, because they're experts of the old world. They would say, better seats, easier check-in, better meals, I don't know, whatever the case may be, better movies, whatever we think about making flying a better experience, which is all valid, but really not disruptive, but much more innovative. And so they realized that they wouldn't come up with the answer, so they built a competition. And this competition was driven by X Prize, which is built by Peter Diamandis at Singularity University. They spent $70 million finding and funding this new business that was going to help them with the future of travel. And the company that won is called Limitless Travel Avatar. And it's already operating around the world. You can look them up. And what Limitless Travel Avatar has got to do is got nothing to do with airplanes or airports. It's got to do with a robot avatar with goggles, earphones, and with a haptic suit. Let me explain. So what they did was they created these humanoid robots and put them into major cities around the world. And what they did then was they gave you a pair of virtual reality goggles, earphones, and a haptic suit that gave you the exact feeling of what this robot was feeling wherever it was. So here's how it works. Is let's say your grandmother is not well and she's in bed and she's never been to Paris, and you want to really take her to Paris, but she can never get out of bed to go to Paris. So what do is you get a suit sent to her with goggles and earphones. You get a suit and goggles and earphones. And let's say you're in Cape Town and your grandmother's in Australia, and you both get these suits sent to you. And what happens now is you hire these 2 robots that are walking down Champs-Élysées. And what you now do is you experience exactly what these robots are experiencing as they're walking down Champs-Élysées. You can hear everything they're hearing. You can see everything they're seeing. You can actually feel the heat, the cold, the push, the pull, because of these haptic suits. And this is all based on the opportunity, the disruptive nature of trying to think what travel will be. Now, will this replace travel? I don't think so. As humans, we still love the experience of traveling, but technology is going to get better and better. And let's say that you want to go to a meeting in London and you can't get there. Why not hire a robot, humanoid robot, to go and sit in the meeting for you, and it's actually you doing that? And the reason I bring this up is we need to start thinking about organizational future forward, like structuring in totally different ways. And this is really the crux of the whole keynote, is we need to think about our organizations in 2 parallel businesses. Now, the most famous business that had a tomorrow team is Apple. When Steve Jobs came back to Apple, he saw a Lisa computer. He hated the Lisa computer. So he took his top engineers, hired new engineers, took them to an office away from Apple, put a pirate flag on that office, and they created the Macintosh that disrupted the Lisa computer. So the way I see and what I'm seeing around the world that's really working well is companies mostly are today teams. And you want to focus your teams on doing today's work because there's a lot of complexity in today's world. You know, you don't want to get them to start thinking about artificial intelligence because one, they might not even have the experience or they might not even understand it. So you create panic within those teams. So today team, what do? They focus on 1 to 2 year horizons. They are focused on economies of scale because we still need to pay for the tomorrow team based on economies of scale. They're all about profitability because this is key in economies of scale. They're all about old business models, supply and demand, and these sort of business models. And these are experts of today. If I'm really truthful, they're experts of yesterday, because as we evolve into the future, this profitability angle at all costs, this economies of scale really starts to change and evolve into tomorrow teams. And these tomorrow teams are focused on a 3 to 5 year horizon. Look at Japan Airlines developing this option for travel over the next 5 years, and the technology will get cheaper, faster, and better as we move forward. We also have economies of learning, not economies of scale, just like Shein has done, creating a business that's worth 10 times more than Zara over the last 5 years. We have experimentation, not necessarily profitability. And again, you can realize with the economies of learning business, you're still very profitable, but you can experiment outside the need to make profit. Just like Shein is using artificial intelligence and data and creating 10,000 new styles for almost nothing, you realize that experimentation in that process doesn't always have to mess with your profitability, because Shein is definitely incredibly profitable, but they're experimenting with economies of learning in many ways. They're using new business models, and there's 10 different business models that are evolving. I do a whole workshop on that as well. And these people are all about experts of tomorrow. And this is really where I want to end the talk. I've got 2 more slides, and I want to get you to ask this question of yourself. And this is a quote from Dr. Joe Dispenza. He says, are you living a life based on your memories of the past? Or are you living a life based on the vision of your future? And many of us don't even give this much thought, because what we do when we wake up in the morning is we think about the problems that came from yesterday, last week, 3 months ago, 8 years ago, 55 years ago, if we haven't dealt with some of our trauma. And so really what most of us are doing are living in the past. Now, if we had to change our vision and think about the future, use our imagination in the right way, and start to drive ourselves towards something rather than running away from something, you become agile optimist quite naturally. And so really, this is the process of us rewiring our brains to understand how to actually access a vision of the future rather than memories of the past. And in this period of time, right now, what we need to do is seek discomfort, is really start to think about asking ourselves new questions of how we're evolving and elevating to meet this future at what it needs from us. Thank you so much for your attention. I'm across all social media channels. I've got 5 books out there. They're all still available. And I'd love to do a Q&A with you as we finish this keynote. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, John. That was absolutely amazing. Fantastic, fantastic talk. Thank you very, very much. It was really insightful, and also quite daunting as well when you look at what technology is doing. But I guess that's the evolution of humankind. You know, we either adapt or we fail in this whole process. Now, somebody asks a very valid question, seeing that you've cancelled your Netflix account. How are you going to watch the 2nd season of Squid Game?
I have no idea. I don't think I'm going to watch the 2nd season of Squid Game. So that's a good question, but I'm not going to watch it.
No, listen. So here's a great question that's coming from Xavier. He wants to know, how can we ensure proper usage of resources, especially in the context of the future and increasing challenges for small businesses?
What resources? I don't understand.
Well, if you can clarify.
If I just give you an example. So look, I think if you think about any sort of resources, technology is making these resources cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. As an individual now, you can use your MacBook to write songs, make videos, edit them, post them, earn money, invoice through Xero, have accounts around the world. So resources are actually more abundantly available to us than ever before. Now, it depends which resources you're talking about.
Well,
because
he's talking about them here. He's put them up, John. He talks about money, human capital, and communication.
Well, human capital, you have access to more people around the world than ever before at cheaper prices. If you want anything done at a really good price, go to India and Philippines, you can work with people there. If you want to think about communication, resource of communication is free today with WhatsApp and Zoom and all these sort of things. And the last one was money. And look, I think if you're adding value on a continuous basis, you never have an issue with money. Money becomes quite scarce when what you are servicing or creating becomes commoditized. commoditized. And that's the real problem, is that things that we used to make a lot of money of, we don't make money anymore because things have become commoditized in many different ways. So think about cinemas. Cinemas are never going to be hugely profitable businesses anymore. Why? Because you have YouTube on your phone. Why would you want to go to a cinema? It used to be the only place for us to see something amazing. Now we have access to it anywhere we go. So I think what we have to do is always stay one step ahead of the market to continuously create resources of money coming in. I hope that answers your question. I think it's a broad question.
No, absolutely. And John, you know, this series that we've done with iStore Business and with GIBS is very much focused on the small business and the entrepreneurs and medium-sized businesses. Now, it's so interesting how you've got, and you touched on it in your presentation, you've got David and Goliath versus the small guys, and everything's been democratized, right? Technology's been democratized. Now, what advice do you give to small, medium-sized businesses to stay focused on that trajectory that you've been talking about, with you know, with all of the innovation and all the disruption that's taking place around us? How do you as an individual stay focused on what you need to do and how you stay ahead of the game?
Yeah, look, it's not an easy process. That's why I ended off the slide with seek discomfort. And what I always advise people is spend 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes in the lunchtime in the future. In other words, listen to a podcast that tells you about the future. Watch a YouTube, read something, read a book, because what we have to do is, in order for us to evolve, we need to be exposed to new information. And what most people do is they don't expose themselves to any information except the news, and then they worry about their business and they worry about how their margins are shrinking, but actually not bringing any new input into their worlds. And when you start bringing new input into the world, you start to become more comfortable with these technological changes, with new language. And ultimately, I want to remind all small businesses out there, why are you a small business when the internet has no gateway? When you have 5 billion people around the world that are able to become your customers, why are you not thinking more on a global scale? Why are you thinking in small and medium size? So I think we should also think about exposing ourselves to more opportunities out there in the world. It's never been easier to do business internationally. And also for us to spend at least 10 minutes a day in the future. And often what I tell my clients is, why don't you make Thursday mornings future mornings? So spend 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 2 hours with your staff, watching something about the future, exposing yourself to something new, so that this becomes quite comfortable for you to engage with rather than scary and daunting.
Yeah. But John, you know, one thing about you is that what I've learned is that, you know, the answers lie around us, right? I mean, they're staring at us in the face. But you got to clear your mind. And we were talking about this just before, you know, we came on live, and there was a picture that you posted on your social media about you lying on a beach, or not lying on a beach, but meditating on a beach at your Joe Dispenza retreat that you went on, which I found absolutely incredible. But the last two questions I think are so relevant to your current book, Who Do We Become? The one is, what is the premise of being emotionally fit? Is it being in tune with your emotions, using emotions to drive us? And the other question comes in from Judy, who wants to know, how do we prepare mentally to adapt to continuous change? What methodology do you use to manage your brain? Is it out there on the neuroscience side? And I know that you're going to talk about this, but for me, and I tried it a while back and I stopped doing it, and I'm going to start meditating again, because you said you meditate every single morning. And I think that is such an important start. It's just one step of what you've been talking about.
So it's a great, great question. And thank you so much for asking it. I couldn't fit everything into one keynote. I wanted to make this more business focused, but let's talk about emotional fitness and really the skills of the future. And there's 5 things that we need to think about. The first thing is, because the future is emotional and requires intuition, what we need to do is create more spaces to deal with trauma from our past. Remember that all of our perspectives, all of our energy access, all of this is based on how much trauma we've had from our past that we haven't dealt with. And many of us, even the country of South Africa, is still dealing with trauma from the past. But individually, who here doesn't have daddy issues and mommy issues and money issues and sex issues and addiction issues and all of these issues that are all based on trauma that we haven't evolved into and not healed? So my first thing to become more emotionally aware is to heal our past. And, you know, recently, Aki, you mentioned this as well. I hadn't spoken to my dad for 20 years. And because of my own work, I then went to go see my dad. 3 weeks ago, I was with my dad. And, you know, he hasn't changed at all. And that was the whole point, is that I needed to deal with the trauma of what happened with my dad, become okay with it, heal it, and to go see my dad, not as my dad, but as another man that had made some mistakes in his life. That this can only be achieved by healing trauma from our past. Now, there's many modalities that you can use. One of them that I use is called family constellations. Please look it up online. There's many facilitators around the world that help us dealing with trauma from our lineage as well as our own lives. The second thing to become more emotionally aware or fit is to make decisions based on our curiosity and fascination, not on an addiction to certainty. Now, you understand that curiosity is exactly the opposite of addiction to certainty. And so if we make decisions by curiosity, guess what happens? We're continuously energized, because when we do things that we're curious about, we become amazingly good at them because we spend hours and hours doing them and we forget that time is even around. Now, if you just think about my career, I've actually never studied. Everything that you are watching here today is self-studied. Why? Because I'm incredibly curious about all the topics that I'm talking to you about. I travel around the world, seek out the best teachers, listen to the best podcasts, watch the best lectures, because I'm curious about this topic. So my emotional awareness around this topic is really high, and I keep driving that. Third, is we have to start learning how to use our imagination better. Now, when you heal your trauma, automatically your imagination becomes better. And because of unhealed trauma, we're anxious about the future because we think it's going to be like the past. Now, if I always thought that all men were like my dad, I would never have any friends around me. You know, I'm not gay, but men in general, I would always attract abusive alpha males into my life throughout my life. And it was because I expected everybody to be like my dad because of the unhealed trauma. So actually using imagination in a powerful way makes us incredibly emotionally aware and fit for the future. Fourth is experimentation of new behaviors. And this is really key when it comes to meditation, because if you think about any sports star out there that's won a gold medal, what do they say after the interview? They say, I have won this gold medal thousands of times in my meditations. What does that mean? They've rehearsed this behavior in the future. Let me ask you, Aki, when have we ever been taught how to rehearse new behaviors in the day that we're going into? Never. Nobody's ever taught us this. So the experimentation of new behaviors becomes something that we need to train ourselves on. And the fifth thing to become more emotionally aware and fit for the future is meditation. And I'll tell you why. It's because meditation changes our brain waves. And with new brain waves, we're able to create new plasticity inside our brains. And the best way to describe this is when you come back from a holiday, you're a totally different person. Why? You're in an alpha brain state. And what is an alpha brain state? An alpha brain state is when you're calm, relaxed, imaginative. You see the world in broad perspectives. There's no critical voice inside your head. You're kind of chilled with things. You can connect dots that you otherwise wouldn't have seen. But then the minute you get back to work, 2 hours into work, you're back into beta brainwave, and you'll comment, I can't even remember being on holiday. And what that means is that you've tapped out of an alpha brainwave and moved into a beta brainwave. And in a beta brainwave, you're in danger, you're in survival, you're on edge, you're anxious, you have a critical voice inside your head. And it's that brainwave that requires wine o'clock, pharmaceuticals, and just to have the weekend to get away from all this noise. And people that suffer from high beta brainwave are people that are always late. Their to-do list never ends. They're always anxious. They always need wine o'clock, and sometimes on a Wednesday at 10 o'clock in the morning. No judgment. But this is the thing, is that meditation is the thing that gets us off high beta and into alpha. And in this process of alpha, guess what? We're naturally more imaginative, naturally more creative, naturally more curious. So meditation becomes the gateway in changing the neuroplasticity inside our brains to actually evolve into the humans we need to become.
Wow. And that's such a wonderful way to end this particular series, because at the end of the day, you need to flush your brain, you need to flush your emotions, because it's going to open up everything else around you. And John Sanei, on behalf of everyone at iStore Business and at GIBS, thank you so much for that insightful talk. And I'm certainly walking away learning new things, and some great questions coming in. Thank you very much, John. And John's latest book, everybody, Who Do We Become? It's available right now. It's a bestseller, so do get your hands on it. It's absolutely brilliant. And we hope that you've enjoyed this series. And on behalf of iStore Business and the team, the Meets team, and on behalf of GIBS, thank you so much for joining us.